Hello and welcome to the Persephone Path. This is episode 1 of a series in parts that I am going to be offering. I am very excited about this. The Persephone archetype is very near and dear to my heart. So, the main focus of Persephone is the descent. So, it is not about going into the darkness for its own sake, but into the understanding that where there is darkness, there is light. So, today's focus, we're going to be moving into the place where the understanding of light and shadow, how they meet, where the feminine psyche is reborn in that place. So, in this first episode, we're going to begin with the myth that has shaped generations of women, the story of Persephone and the mother wound that lives within all of us as it lives within the deep collective consciousness, the collective psyche. So Persephone was once the core. If you are familiar with that word, Kore, the maiden, the innocent daughter of Demeter, the mother's daughter. So she played in the fields of narcissus and lilies, untouched by the world's suffering, the world's ache. Not a problem in the world, right? This is this archetype of the innocence and naivety of the young girl within us. And then the earth splits open. Hades rose from below, seized her, pulled her into the underworld. So it's a story that has been told as violation and loss. And it is. But it is also an initiation. So in shamanic understanding, wounds are openings, portals that break the surface of ordinary life so that the soul can descend, can remember and evolve. So every one of us who has lived through trauma, abandonment, or emotional collapse knows this. The descent can look like madness, depression, addiction, anxiety, psychoses, right? But beneath the symptoms is a spiritual initiation calling us to deeper integration. So the mother wound at the center of Persephone's story is the severance from her mother, Demeter, the first heartbreak of the feminine lineage. And when the mother, Demeter, loses her daughter, she withholds nourishment, the harvest, and the earth becomes barren. Nothing grows. So this myth mirrors the collective mother wound, our lost connection to the nurturing, life-giving principle, both within and without. So to soft and gentle love and care, to grace and calm, to the scent of flowers in the air, we are removed. So it's the ache of growing up in a world that teaches us to separate from our instincts, our needs, our pleasures, our emotional truth. So for many of us, the early rupture with the mother through absence, neglect, enmeshment sometimes, or trauma becomes the blueprint for how we later relate to life itself. We abandon ourselves the way we once felt abandoned, and we over-nurture others the way our mothers once overgave or undergave. And we lose ourselves in love, in caretaking, and in the underworlds of others. And we search for love everywhere outside, but not within. And this is the Persephone pattern. So the lie and the seed is part of the story. These symbolically, the lie and the seed. There's a part of the story that's often overlooked, which I am going to speak of today. When Persephone returns from the underworld, Demeter asks, "Did you eat anything while you were below?" And Persephone lies. She says that Hades forced her to eat the pomegranate, but we know that she chose to taste the seeds. And that small act, that bite, and that lie reveals the deeper psychology of this archetype. The core hides her own desires, hides her purpose, hides her selfishness, and hides her desire for sovereign power. She cannot yet bear to tell her mother, "I wanted it. I wanted the mystery, the depth, the pleasure." So she pretends to be helpless. She avoids claiming her choice. And this is where the pattern of self-abandonment begins. And don't get me wrong, there is a helplessness, right? I am not overlooking the fact that she was abducted, okay, and she was violated. We are just looking at another aspect, okay, another aspect of the deep feminine psyche. So, in this pattern of self abandonment that we see beginning in this moment for her, When we deny our own authority and desire, we stay trapped in the role of the innocent victim, always being taken by life rather than choosing it. And we may even be unaware of this pattern. We may mistake surrender for powerlessness. And often, so often, we confuse devotion with disappearance. How many times do we choose a person or a thing that we know is not truly to our benefit, and we sacrifice ourselves? We allow an aspect of ourselves to disappear in the choosing. So the pomegranate is an aphrodisiac, right? It's a symbol of pleasure, of life force, of eros. And hidden inside Persephone's abduction is her own longing to descend, to know the tantric mystery of transformation, of alchemical union. And some part of her wanted to go. And that's what we need to honor. That's the truth within us all that we need to um, reclaim. And that's the unforgettable truth of the process of awakening, that even in our deepest suffering, there's a thread of the soul saying yes. So, in psychological language, the underworld we know represents the unconscious. It's where all of the disowned parts of self live, the grief and the rage and the shame and the madness and the immense creative power that we hide, often, sometimes, to survive. And so when these energies rise faster than the ego can integrate, we can experience what psychiatry calls psychosis, a break from consensual reality. But from a shamanic perspective, psychosis is the psyche's way of saying that the structure that kept me safe is too small now. I'm bursting through. And so the descent of Persephone can manifest as emotional overwhelm, nervous breakdowns, spiritual emergency. And we understand the terms of borderline structures. It looks like endless cycles of merging and abandonment. In psychotic breaks, it's the total collapse of boundaries, the self flooded by archetypal energies too vast to hold. And in disassociation, it's a splitting of identity, one part of us surviving in daylight while another lives in the dark. Okay, but here's the key. If the descent is met with containment, which is support of some kind, if someone holds the lamp, the psyche can integrate the underworld rather than drown in it. And so Persephone represents, though despite our independence, we thrive on peer support. We thrive when our divinity is mirrored. We we not we don't need to self-abandon, but we do need to see ourselves reflected from another as a whole, healthy, and enough as we are, right? So this is what I call becoming the queen, the one who learns to walk between the worlds without losing herself, who learns to bond without self-destruction. Because Persephone is a vulnerable feminine archetype. She is naturally the mother's daughter and the wife. She is bonded by nature, unlike archetypes like Athena or Venus, Aphrodite, who have their own independence. They are not said to be, they don't represent the vulnerability of the bonding process. So there is also, you may know this psychoanalytic term called foreclosure, which I found very interesting when I began to understand it. And it has to do with this missing signifier in the psyche that never entered the symbolic order of the psyche. So usually it's called the name of the father. This is an actual clinical term to this understanding, and it represents the law of boundary that separates child from mother, or self from other, or inner from outer, that we all need to learn. And so when that signifier is foreclosed, when there's no reliable structure of authority or father in a girl's life, the psyche has no symbolic anchor. And so later in life, when it encounters that missing element in the form of law or limitations or authority, or in any kind of unhealthy dominance or taking advantage of by man, it can't symbolize it. So it returns to a nature of what we can understand as hallucination or delusions or naivety. upholding something in the personality or the potential of the other person that isn't actually authentic, we could say, or real. So in the mythic language, in the actual myth of the story, this is what happened. Zeus, the paternal authority, her father, actually colludes with Hades and betrays Demeter. So her father allowed the abduction. So there is no clean separation and no trust in the law that she experienced. And the feminine is left uncontained, like swinging between engulfment and abandonment. And so the psyche splits. Persephone's descent becomes the attempt to build that missing structure from the inside, to create her own law and eventually her own crown. And she becomes the queen precisely because no one came to save her. And so when we own the truth, that part of us chose and chooses the descent, something changes. We stop being the core who hides and starts becoming the queen who claims. And we stop saying, I had no choice. And we start saying, I wanted to know myself more deeply. And this was the path I chose. This was the path to power. So self responsibility becomes sacred maturity. And it doesn't justify the trauma, but it reclaims our agency within it. And it's the moment we stop being defined by the abduction and we begin to author our own return. So Persephone's story is every woman's story who has loved someone broken, tried to fix them, disappeared into their pain, or lost herself in caretaking of some form. Okay. And it's also the story of every person who has spiraled into depression or madness and found wisdom waiting there. Because she teaches that the underworld is not a punishment, it is a passage. It is where we become whole to what life has to offer. So the Persephone archetype is also deeply tantric by nature. And tantra means to weave and to integrate opposites, essentially. And she is the weaver of life and death, of innocence and experience, love and shadow. The pomegranate's red juice is both blood and nectar, pain and pleasure intertwined, right? So when we stop rejecting our desire, when we allow pleasure to become part of our healing, and when we awaken to our power, we awaken the alchemical fire within, our sovereignty, our agency to act and to choose. And this is the sacred erotic. So, not as seduction, but as full body presence with life itself. Because we know pleasure is power. It roots us back in the body, the earth, and the rhythm of nature, right? The moon, the psychical rhythm that is inherent within us as women. And it is what calls us. It's what awakens within us our own spring, right? We come back after winter. And so there is a fine line between descent and disintegration. And so, in the absence of containment and the support that we truly need, a descent can turn psychotic. So, without language to express or anchor into, or witness to support or nurture, the soul can get, and does get lost in its own symbolism of the moment. But when we reintroduce meaning through pure and true connection and personal power, we give the psyche a bridge back. And that's what Persephone represents, the bridge between worlds. She becomes the psychopomp, the guide of souls through the death realms. So when we look at mental health through this lens, the question becomes not how do we fix what's broken, but how do we honor the initiation that's trying to happen? The descent is dangerous, yes, but also profoundly sacred when guided with love and the right structure. So as Persephone matures, she learns to move between the realms. She can descend without dissolving, right, into the victim. She can merge without losing herself. She can love without disappearing. And this is the evolution from self-abandonment to self-authority. She becomes both the healer and the healed, the shamaness who can sit with the demons and still remember her name, remember who she is. She teaches us that to be whole We must include it all: our madness, our pleasure, our grief, our divinity. We don't escape the underworld, we integrate it, right? That's the path of true sovereignty. So let's take a breath. Notice where you feel this mother wound in your own body, the place that tightens when you think of needing to be good, quiet, perfect, smaller. And then let's whisper, I choose. I choose to descend consciously. I choose to reclaim my desire. I choose to return crowned. So, Persephone's myth reminds us that the path to healing the feminine psyche and our collective mental health begins when we stop lying about our hunger for life, when we tell the truth about our pleasure, our pain, and our power. That is when we heal the split between innocence and authority. And this is the revolution of soul. It begins within, right? I always say the revolution is inner, and the world changes because of it. So thank you for joining me. In our next episode, I am planning to explore the mother's grief and the shadow that comes with that control, and how Demeter's despair mirrors the over-functioning mother and the rescuer, and how we release the cycle of enmeshment that we can inherit. So until then, may your descent be guided, your truth be spoken, and your crown worn. So much love. Take care.